Welcome to this week's vlog. In this video I show you what I consider to be the best way to shoot panoramics. Just before we jump into this tutorial, I'm very pleased to announce that Squarespace are sponsoring this video. So if you're looking to build a website, if you're looking to purchase a domain name, or indeed if you need some web space, then squarespace.com is where you should be. Squarespace.com/Gary Gough will gain you at least 10% off whatever package you decide to sign up for. Right, first of all, I've established my shot. And the shot I want to try and achieve in this particular image is well outside the capabilities of my 24mm lens at its widest point. Hence the reason why I've chosen this. Now, it's in the middle of the day, it's bright sunlight, there's not a cloud in the sky, and it's going to be a miserable shot, but that doesn't matter. The quality of the shot in this instance doesn't matter. It's about the technique on how I achieve my panoramic shots. Okay, so before we do anything, and this is very, very important, let's get our tripod set up and let's level our tripod. It's really, really important that we level our tripod. Now, I've got a level actually on my tripod here and here. That's actually on my tripod. Some people actually have a level on their tripod head. Now, leveling your tripod head isn't the same as leveling your tripod. So when I say level your tripod, it's really important that you level your tripod. If you have a tripod and you haven't got a level on there, then guess it and try and get it as close as you can. But I would suggest that you go out and buy a small attachment that you can buy for your tripod, not for the top of your camera and not for the tripod head. It has to be an attachment for your tripod. I think they only cost about £10 anyway. Remember, preparation is key. So let's just make some small adjustments here until that bubble is right in the middle of my level. Boom, there you go. So now my tripod is set and ready to go. And the reason why we get this level is because we're going to introduce the camera, then level the camera using the levels on the tripod head. And then that simply means that the camera tripod, the tripod is level, and also the camera is level. So when we do a sweep from one side to the other, your camera will remain horizontal and it'll stay level and equal to the floor. Camera is on and ready to go. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to set my camera into portrait orientation. Not landscape orientation, but portrait orientation. And the reason being is because if your camera was in landscape orientation, realistically, we can make the pano as wide as we want to. It doesn't really matter. But when you start going left to right, then we'll end up with a very, very narrow image. And so what we prefer to do is shoot in portrait orientation, and the reason being is because portrait orientation will give us more floor and it'll give us more sky, so that when we do a sweep we'll end up with a much taller image, an image with a greater depth from floor to ceiling, and that way it'll give us more to play with in post-production and it'll give us more options to crop as well. I have a level on the back of my camera, so I'm simply going to fine tune it until there. Now I've got my green line. Okay, that's the preparation so far done. Tripod level, tripod head with camera is now level. That means camera in portrait orientation. Of course, it means now when I sweep from left to right or right to left, the camera will remain horizontal all the way, exaggerating slightly, but it doesn't go in that angle, it goes nice and horizontal. Brilliant, nice and simple so far. Right, let's talk about the shooting modes. In my opinion, there is only one way to shoot a pano. It's in manual. Now, if you're not used to shooting in manual, if manual is something you've never shot in before, then just follow this technique. You'd be surprised just how easy it is. I'm going to set my ISO to the base number. The base number is the lowest number that your camera will allow. In this particular camera, it'll go to ISO 50. I think some cameras will ISO 64, but most cameras will certainly go down to ISO 100. But either way, set your ISO to the lowest number. It's called the base number. Now, simply switch your aperture to f11. My ISO is at the base number, the aperture is at f11. The reason why we set our aperture at f11, because f11 tends to be the most commonly used aperture for landscape photographers, but for very good reason. And the reason being, because it's in the middle of our range of apertures, it tends to be what we call the sweet spot. So it'll be the sharpest of your lens. But f11 also, your aperture controls your depth of field, and your aperture in this particular instance at f11 will ensure that pretty much everything from tippy toes to as far as the eye can see, it'll render it all in focus. So there you go, it's as simple as that. You could pretty much run, unless you're doing something very specific, but you can pretty much shoot 99% of all your landscape shots in f11. Just watch any vloggers, watch any of my vlogs, and more often than not, unless I'm doing something specific with shutter speeds, then my aperture is nearly always on f11. Okay, so now we've established that ISO at our base number, f11. All I now need to do is activate my light meter and adjust my shutter speed, because the third element in our exposure triangle in this instance is our shutter speed. And our shutter speed is what we will adjust now to ensure that we get enough light into the camera lens onto the sensor. And it's done so easily. In live view, you'll have a light meter on the back of the camera. You'll also have a live view if you look in through your viewfinder. Then once we've done that, there is also another method that we can use to fine tune how much light that the camera receives onto the sensor. We'll come on to that in a second. So once again, activate the light meter in live view. To activate the light meter, all you need to do is to press your fire button halfway down. You'll notice that my light meter here, a little dot activates, a little dot appears. Now all I need to do now is, if I slow my shutter speed down, you'll see the light meter move to the right hand side. That means there's too much light coming in. If I increase my shutter speed, that means less light will come in. That means my light meter will now move to the left hand side. So all you now need to do is move it and adjust it until it goes into the middle. Now the only thing you've got to be careful of is the light meter in my camera, which is probably likely to be the same in your camera as well. It's being read from the focus point. My focus point is that part there in the middle that I'm moving, as you can see. Now what you will notice is if I move my focus point into the sky, my light meter now is indicating there's more light in the sky. If I come down to the floor, if I choose a darker area in the floor, you'll see now my light meter has dropped down, which means there's less light. So in that instance, there's a couple of things that we can do. Generally, because there's more light in the sky than there is in the floor, we tend to put neutral density filters on the front of your lens, and that's what I'll do now. That's just simply to balance the light if there's more light in the sky than there is on the floor. So we'll do that, and then I'll re-meter. Okay, so I'm going to add onto here what's called a 0.9, which is a 3-stop neutral density soft filter. And I'm just simply going to drop that filter down until the dark part, if you can see that, I'm not sure if you can see that, but until the dark part actually drops on to the horizon, like so. So now, if I reset my camera's light meter there, now when I move the focus point into the sky and then move it onto the floor, it's pretty much the same. If you're used to post-processing your work, then don't worry about that too much. As long as there's no what we call clipping, in other words, as long as there's no overexposure going on. If there is, then I always suggest underexposing. Okay, so now we've done that with our light meter. There's also another way that some people prefer to use this other way. I tend to use my light meter and then use this other way. The other way, of course, I'm making reference to is your histogram. So for me now to bring my histogram up on the screen like so, that now indicates to me that it's pretty well exposed. If I slow my shutter speed down, more light is being introduced on the histogram, and really a lot of people prefer to move the histogram further to the right to introduce more light, as long as it doesn't clip. So now on the right hand side here you can see that clipping has appeared. That means there's overexposure in the shot. So all we need to do is simply increase the shutter speed, decrease the shutter speed until we get the histogram pretty much looking like that. So it's just a case of playing around with your shutter speed and seeing how it affects your histogram and seeing how it affects your light meter. But like I said, the most important thing is that the histogram, they pretty much sit around about in the middle. It can go to the right if you want to. A lot of people tend to move it to the right. The reason being is because then we can claw more details out of the shadows. But don't get too et up with that at the moment. Just get used to using your histogram. Okay, so now that's established, we're now ready to focus. Okay, now let's very briefly talk to you about the focusing. I'm going to use an automatic focus on my camera, but I'm going to choose something a third of the way into the image. Now, as a general rule, I always just focus a third of the way into my image. Remember, if you focus a third of the way into your image at f11, because aperture controls your depth of field, pretty much I guarantee you everything will be in focus. The only time I would ever focus stack or change my focus from a third of the way into the frame is if something sat really close to the camera. If it sat really close to the camera, then I would focus on the subject that sits really close to the camera, and then I would take another shot focusing in on infinity or a third of the way into the frame. Okay, but as a general rule, and it is only a general rule, but it's a rule that I abide by all the time. When I shoot my landscapes, unless something sits very close to the camera, I always focus a third of the way into the frame, even if there's nothing in the foreground. Rather than focus on infinity, I always focus a third of the way into the frame. So all I'm going to do here, the trees, which they don't form foreground interest, but they are roughly a third of the way into the frame. So let's take my focus point, make sure my lens is set to automatic, take it across, let the camera do its thing, it's hunting, and now it's focused a third of the way into the frame. Now this is the best part. Once it's focused a third of the way into the frame, simply select your focus and switch it to manual. So now, when I do a panoramic sweep from left to right, the camera will no longer try and focus. It's the same as what we call lock and reframe. So focus a third of the way into the frame and then simply switch your focus on your lens to manual. Dead simple. So now if you think about this, your lens is set to manual, your camera is set to manual, your tripod is level and your tripod head is level. That means in a manual fashion, we're now in full control of this image. When we take a sweep from left to right, I guarantee you, you are going to be giving yourself 100% the best chance of achieving a perfectly exposed image, and it's going to be completely consistent as you move across the horizon from left to right, right to left, or whatever you want. That's it. Now ready to take some shots. So all I now need to do is point my camera. I need to make sure that if I want this tree overhanging here on the left hand side, then I just want to make sure that I give myself plenty of breathing space. So I'm going to shoot way past the left hand side, and I'm now going to take that shot. Set your timer to 2 seconds if you want to, unless you've got an intervalometer or a trigger, in which case. And when I take my shot, the camera's not even trying to hunt for a focus. Dead simple. Once I've done that, now what's really important is I'm going to move the tripod head, but I want to overlap my previous shot by at least 1/3. I've got a click lock system here on my tripod, so I can twist it, and of course for consistency, it doesn't really matter, but for consistency I could twist 1, 2, 3. That's roughly overlapping the previous shot by 1/3. 1, 2, 3. There you go. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. There you go. That's that pano in the bag. Nice and simple. Okay, so before I take the images and move them into Photoshop and post-process them, stitch them all together, I'll show you how I do that in 30 seconds from now. Before that though, just take a look at the images that I took this morning using this very same technique. Creating a Squarespace website is by far the easiest way to showcase yourself as a photographer online. Creating stunning websites is as simple as choosing a template and dragging and dropping your media. Stand out with a professional website, portfolio, or online store. And if you use the code squarespace.com/Gary Gough, you'll get at least 10% off whatever package you decide to order. And of course, that will also include a 14-day free trial. Let's select these 9 images. Let's open them up into Photoshop or Lightroom and let's create a panoramic. So let's grab our 9 images. Let's hit enter. And now the images will all open up in a pre-Photoshop screen. The pre-Photoshop screen that I use is called ACR, which is Adobe Camera Raw. Now, I'm not a Lightroom user, hence the reason I'm using ACR. If you've never seen this program before, then it means you're probably a Lightroom user. But don't worry, because Adobe Camera Raw uses the same tools and it works in the same way as Lightroom does. It's just laid out in a very, very different way. So watch. Let's click on the first image, press Ctrl and A to select them all. We don't need to make any adjustments to our images at this present moment in time. Right mouse click and simply merge to panorama. And Photoshop will do its thing and it'll give us basically an image of what it's likely to look like before it's been rendered. And look how awesome that is. If I untick this auto crop button just here, if I untick that, you can see now that the image is nearly 100% perfect. There's very little sky missing, very little on the edges missing, and very little of the floor missing. And the reason why it looks this good is simply because of the prep work that we applied before taking this picture. So there's a few things we can do with this image now before we actually open it up into Photoshop or Lightroom. We can use the boundary wrap to fill in those spaces all the way up there. So all those spaces are now gone. Or we can simply click on the auto crop, or if you're a little bit more proficient in Photoshop and if you prefer, at the moment it's at its widest and its highest or its tallest, so you could actually just open this image as it is now in Photoshop and then fill in those missing areas using your clone stamp or using your content aware tools. Plenty of tools for that in Photoshop, but in this instance I'm simply going to press the auto crop button. How awesome is that? I can't stress enough. The reason why it's this good is because of the prep work that we put in to take in this picture. Click on the merge button and Photoshop will now save it as a .dng file. And a .dng file is Adobe's, it's like Adobe's version of their raw file, so it maintains all of the information and details that you'd find in your raw files actually in the DNG file. And there we go. Perfect. So all we need to do now is just simply make the basic adjustments. Hit C for my crop tool. Let's have a look. Okay, I'm going to go for quite a tight letterbox orientation crop on that. Just a very slight adjustment there. I'm going to move the edge in there. That's the camera that you see here on the left hand side that I was using to video myself at the time, but I don't need all of that in. I just want to make sure this area here where that tree is in, I don't mind the one on the left hand side, but of course that's entirely up to you. If I move this crop closer in, it means that this area of land jutting out here falls better on the rules of thirds. And in terms of my adjustments, if I come up to this tool here, my lens corrections, and I'm going to click my box to remove any chromatic aberrations and enable my profile correction. So any ailments with my lens, then this program will simply fix it. Nothing any more exciting than that. If I come down to my main screen here, if I grab my highlight slider, move it to the left hand side, you've probably seen this done a million times, push my slider or my shadow slider to the right hand side, and maybe my dehaze, maybe 10, maybe add a little bit of dehaze on there, not too much, and that is looking pretty good. So once that's done, I can simply click on open image, and the image now opens up into Photoshop or opens up into Lightroom if you're a Lightroom fan. But the image will open up for me in Photoshop, and then all I simply do, using the layers, go through, clean it up, tidy it up, add any effects I need to add, vignetting, etc, etc, and there you go. That's my Pano shots. It's all done so automatically for you. This becomes second nature so quickly, and literally it takes 30 seconds to create a 9-image Pano, for instance. So it's super quick. The one tip I will give you is that if you intend to shoot multiple shots to create a Pano on water, then a good tip is to use a very long shutter speed. I'm a fan of very long shutter speeds anyway, but with a flat water, what I call ice skating rinks, then you'll find the images will stitch together a lot easier. One of the ailments that you do find with Photoshop is that it does struggle to connect even the most basics of things like waves, for instance. So just be mindful of that. But for your landscapes, perfectly fine. That concludes this tutorial. If you've enjoyed it, give me a thumbs up and click the subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. Hit that notification bell as well. I've got plenty more tutorials on the way. Cheers.